Hi, I'm Mark Keim, founder of DisasterDoc. I help experts and everyday people around the world to understand disasters so they can better protect themselves, their families, and their businesses. So the problem nowadays is that disasters are becoming more frequent worldwide, and the number of disasters are expected to increase in the future due to things like climate change and people that are settling into these areas where many of these disaster hazards already exist. So the problem also lies with the very nature of emergency response and rescue, which often occurs too little and too late. It's too little in the sense that disasters are by definition a mismatch of overwhelming needs and too few resources. That's the absolute definition of a disaster. And then therefore responders are forced to prioritize and be able to reach only a certain segment of the population at a time. It's often too late too, because disasters occur in three main phases: before the disaster impact, during the impact itself, and also after the impact. But the deaths and injuries actually occur during the impact. They occur during the hurricane when the wind's blowing. They occur during the tornado when the damage is occurring, or when the earth is shaking and the buildings are coming down in an earthquake. That's when the deaths occur. Those few minutes, those few hours during the impact. And during that time, even if rescuers want to get to you, they can't get on the roads. They can't move any more than you can. So we must therefore learn to rely upon ourselves. So that's why I want to share with you now this new training program that we're offering at DisasterDoc Academy. This is a 6-week online video course entitled Natural Disasters and Health. This course is intended to provide an overview of natural disasters from the health perspective. My story, begins at May 29th, 1982, 3:16 p.m. when many of you know I was hit by a tornado. I lost every material possession that I had during that time. And that story actually starts 15 years earlier when I was growing up as a little boy in Midwestern region of the United States. And at school we received this little newsletter, and we could order books from the back page of that newsletter. And my family never had much money, but my mother always did manage to have enough money for me to buy these books. And at age 7, she bought me a book on tornadoes. And in that book, I read about the history of events and how these tornadoes occur and what causes them to form and how they behave and which way they move and how big are they and so on. And little did she know that this children's book, costing only $1 or so, would actually someday save my life. So let's fast forward 15 years later to Memorial Day weekend in May 29th, 1982. And I was actually studying in school to become a doctor at that period of time and going to college, and had this holiday time, and I was home with my wife. And in our hometown, we actually had a siren that would go off to call firemen to the fire station, and they would go put out fires and so on. And usually this siren would go off for a minute or so, and then it would shut off and complete, and the firemen would do their job. But today, we heard this siren go off, and it kept going on and on and on. And it was very strange, and we went outside, and we looked around, and we actually saw a tornado way off in the distance. And I could see this little characteristic tail of the tornado coming down and touching the ground, and I couldn't believe I was actually, for the first time in my life, seeing one in person. This phenomenon that I had read about when I was a child. And so it was then that I realized, wow, that siren is actually telling me to take cover. And so I went back in the house, and I pulled this kitchen table into the center of the house, and my wife underneath that kitchen table, and I went back out to see if my neighbors were home, and they weren't home. And as I was running back across to the home again to get underneath that table and join my wife, I saw this tornado hitting the schoolhouse, and there was this 3-story brick schoolhouse, and it just churned this red brick schoolhouse, and I saw all those bricks fly up into the air and then back down again. And it was then that I realized, my home is not going to survive that. And so I ran inside, and I grabbed my wife, and I got away from that tornado in that way. How did I know all those things? It was that book that I had read when I was a little boy that told me how tornadoes move, the speed that they move, how much time I could expect. And all of those actions that I took, several actions in a row, were actually based upon that particular book. So there I was, standing among all this debris, and I recognized that this was the debris from my own home. And I looked out across, and maybe 50 feet away was this young man, and when I looked closer, it was actually my brother. And he had been on the other side of the city at the time, completely unaffected. But he had arrived there ahead of time and seen this piles of debris and total devastation of our entire neighborhood, and he thought that my wife and I were actually somewhere among that debris. And I can tell you now, had I not read that children's book, had I not learned those important lessons at that point in time, I would have been under that debris. I wouldn't be here talking to you now. And that's why I want to share with you these important lessons that we can learn together in this particular seminar as well. This is based upon the experience that I had not only at that moment, but actually for the next 20 years of my career at CDC and working with the disaster medical assistance teams in the United Nations, going to places like hurricane in the Caribbean and earthquakes and tsunamis, in the Indian Ocean tsunami, for example, and Hurricane Katrina, the anthrax emergencies related to terrorism and World Trade Center response. So even while we're here in the studio and we're shooting this week, we've had the Chilean volcanic eruption, and we've also had the terrible tragedy of the Nepalese earthquake. So these things continue to come, and they continue to really impart upon me that same lesson that in times like these, it's up to you. It's up to your family and your community to step up and be the real heroes. But in order to do so, we have to learn and act before the event. We have to prevent and protect and prepare for disasters so that you won't be a victim, so that you'll have the knowledge and the skills and the abilities to be able to really make a difference in your world and the world around you. So this includes 15 separate video lessons, each focusing on a different natural disaster, over 140 learning objectives. And it applies that in a global perspective, addressing disasters that have occurred all over the world, both from a historical perspective as well as the modern approach. This course content has two basic elements. One, modules 1 through 3 really establish a foundation for you to understand what is a natural disaster. How does that compare with a man-made disaster, and looking at disasters in general. And then modules 4 through 15 really take a deeper dive one by one and address the health effects for each major natural disaster in the world. So there are 15 course learning modules, and each of them include 3 main components. Number 1, an explanation of the basic natural disaster hazard, whether that be a storm, an earthquake, tornado, and so on. And then number 2, an in-depth understanding of the health consequences associated with each one of these natural disaster hazards. And 3, offering best practices for lowering your risk of harm. And I'd like to share those course topics with you as well, the 15 different modules involved in this particular training program. Number 1, an overview of disasters, including both natural as well as man-made disasters, to give you sort of a high-level picture. And then we talk about the health consequences of disasters. What kind of health effects can we expect from these? We then take a deeper dive into natural disasters in particular and cover the entire range. What are the commonalities among all natural disasters? And then one by one over the next 12 different modules, biological disasters, earthquakes, tsunamis, volcanoes, landslides, floods, cyclones, heat waves, cold waves, drought, tornadoes, wildfires, covering each in individual detail, looking at those in specific. Some of those may apply to you in your particular area that you live, others may not. But I know you're going to find each one of them interesting in their own way, and you can also focus down to once again make this a healthier and safer place for all of us. In addition, I understand that some people are very visual learners and other people learn by listening and by interacting. And so I also want to offer a free set of iTunes audio podcasts along with this particular seminar. In addition, we're going to host a live webinar that we want you to join us as well. The topic of the webinar, Disasters in Health, where you'll have an opportunity to discuss some of these issues and also ask any questions that you may have over these 15 modules. So while disasters are becoming more frequent worldwide, this isn't something that we should fear. If there's anything that I've learned in my lifetime is starting out as a disaster victim and then moving to the disaster manager, it's that a little knowledge can go a long way to saving people's lives. And so it's my hope by sharing this information with you and this knowledge with you that you'll then be able to better protect yourself, your family, and your community.